Thank you very much, Alain. It's nice to be back, actually. Welcome, Lausanne. Good. I'm going to talk about crazy incentives and how they drive security in no man's land. What do I mean by that? I mean, incentives are very often misaligned with security. So we start working away, we struggle, we invest time and resources, and instead of going forward, we're going backwards or in the wrong direction. So despite hard work, we're not getting security in return. And when I start to think about this concept, I realized very often it's incentives that drive us in the wrong direction. We're not aware of the incentives of people working with us. We're not aware of the incentives of vendors selling us their products. We're not even aware of our own incentives. So what I'm going to do is walking you through a couple of examples. Let's dive right in. This is from a video stream from Naomi Wu, a real sexy cyborg on Twitter. I think she walked around in Gansu or Shanghai in January or February and posted the video. And people went crazy immediately because what is happening here? What do you see? You see mostly young women flocking to an undercrossing to do streaming. At first, this looks like a sweatshop. However, they're all volunteers. They want to do this. They want to be there. They want to stream there. Why is that? It's not the beauty of the scenery. It's also not the good company. What is happening is they have incentives to game the location feature of their streaming software. They want to stream from a certain location, from a good neighborhood, instead of being outside town where nobody would follow them. They want to stream from exactly this position. That's why in the night, in the evening, they flock together in an undercrossing. So they have an incentive to game the location feature, and the result is European being puzzled, going crazy over the video. But this exploded so quickly. So what we see here is incentives that play that have very funny results. As Alain said, I'm Christian Folini. I'm a Swiss security engineer. I have a background in medieval history, so this is what I did before I turned to security. This is where I get my helmets from. I'm a co-leader of the OWASP Mod Security Core Rule Set, a web application firewall project. I'm going to talk about that as well. I happen to be the program chair of the partnering conference, Swiss Cyberstorm, happening in October. You see, you have a great company conference at the end of the winter, and you have another great conference in Bern in October. Please join us in Bern on October for Swiss Cyberstorm. Apparently, I'm aware of many helmets. I'm also working in e-voting security, talked about that at a previous keynote. And now I'm going to talk about incentives. I'm taking this off because it's a bit heavy in the end. So incentives. First, what is an incentive? I turn to Wikipedia. What else would I do? And Wikipedia tells me, in general, incentives are anything that persuade a person to alter their behavior. I guess we can agree on that. If we continue with the definition a bit, we get to higher incentives amount to greater levels of effort and therefore higher levels of performance. Streaming in the undercrossing, you get this. You make an effort to drive there, maybe to freeze in the winter for higher levels of performance. That's the view count. Performance already points to economics. Incentives is an economic term. It's definitely not a cybersecurity term. This is not a term that our industry coined. Incentives is an economic, it's a business term, and this already shows you we have different incentives here. We have economic incentives, and we want to have security incentives, and the two are absolutely not aligned with one another. Obviously, if they're misaligned, higher performance means better sales for the company selling you the snake oil. Or stupid tasks that we execute and they result in higher level of friction. More work for us, but not security as a result. Ultimately, we just heat the climate by running more jobs on our computer without much results in terms of security. Think antivirus running on a Windows desktop. And I'm not even saying that this is not necessary. I'm just saying it's a lot of investment of electricity and CPU cycles for relatively little gain, just to keep things up. Optimal incentives mean that we get a maximum of security for a minimal investment of resources. I mean, this is what we actually would like to get. Ideally, we don't have friction. That means we have the incentives pointing over there, and we follow these incentives, and we get the same amount of security that we expected. So if you follow bad incentives that lead you in a different direction, and you're a security engineer working in a blue team, so in defense setup, then you're not doing your job properly. Maybe without even being aware, you just follow incentives. You're not aware that the incentives are actually leading you away from security. And if you implement the wrong incentives that fail to support the security of your users, then shame on you. Because you're placing incentives so people are getting bad security instead of what you're supposed to give them as a defense engineer. Then shame on you. Twitter announced a month ago that they would stop doing text message two-factor authentication for non-paying users. So whoever tried to convince their mother-in-law, like I did, or somebody else, to enable two-factor authentication will realize that text message two-factor authentication is a weak form of two-factor authentication, but at least it is a little bit of security. So they have a relatively small, often people have relatively small security interest, small incentive for security, but text message, you can kind of convince them if you make an effort, and they get a bit of security out of this. And Twitter, or Elon scrambling for money, is now stopping that. What Elon is actually doing, he's doing A/B testing on the strength of the security desire of his users. He presents them with a choice. If you want security, you pay me. And if you want to save money, then you lose security. Or you upgrade to the Google Authenticator or other authenticator apps, and that is simply too complicated for a lot of people, and I didn't manage to explain this to my mother-in-law. So, Elon absolutely made a choice by placing incentives in front of his users, asking them to choose security or money. This was enacted this week, so we don't have the number. Actually, I'm also not sure we're getting to get the numbers. However, it's perfectly clear that if you want to save money, you're going to drop security. And if you want the security, that means more money for Twitter, but I think it's more likely we're getting less security for users. Shame on you, Elon. Shame on you. Some of the examples I'm going to present here will not be quite obvious. And I think that is a problem. With the Elon Musk and Twitter example, it's very obvious where the incentives are. Here, it's not so clear. And I have rounded up a couple of examples where we really need to think very hard. Where are the incentives actually? How are we driven by them? How are users driven by these examples? This is a Nessus report. I have a bit of a knack for Nessus report, and it's not a good one. It's small print, don't try to read this, but it says critical security vulnerabilities 44, substantial. High security vulnerabilities 309. So 309 high security vulnerabilities. I think that is a strong impact. I mean, if you read a report like that, that's a strong message. And the incentive that you're feeling, or I'm feeling, is let's jump to action. This is actionable. Every critical security vulnerability here is meant to be fixed, isn't it? I mean, you want to patch this, you want to get secure, you want to invest a lot of time and resources, namely if audit is around the corner. This happened to a friend of mine. That's how I returned on Nessus reports last week. He was handed 229 Nessus report by a customer. Customer didn't care about security for several years. Now audit was coming back, and he, as a security consultant, received the 220 pages Nessus report. Please fix this for us. You have 4 weeks. Now, if you jump to action and start on page number 1, or after the executive summary in page number 2, you're doing a bad job here, unfortunately. Second screenshot is actually from the report my friend received. Nessus proposes to ensure that the proxy modules are disabled on a given server. The problem is that server was a proxy server. So Nessus effectively tried to convince my friend, please disable the central functionality of that server so you're secure. I mean, this is a classic false positive. This is stupid advice. Nessus has been around for more or less 20 years. Proxy technology on web servers has been around for 25 years at least. And Nessus is still not in a position to find out whether a server is a proxy server or not. I tell you, I'm working on proxy server. It's a one-liner. It's so easy. If it has a backhand configured, chances are it's a proxy server. And Nessus is not able to do it. What is nice about Nessus tells you how it found out the proxy modules are enabled. This is the second slide here. There is the command. If you look at the command, it looks really sophisticated. Wow, AWK and stuff. Wow, grep, that's really nice. It's the wrong config file. Nessus takes the default config file. Chances are the server is running a different config file. Nessus is too stupid to identify the real config file. People pay money for this shit. I'm surprised. What are the incentives here? The incentives tell you, work through the spreadsheet, check off the findings, and you gain in security. This is what Nessus promises to you. But the result is actually time wasted fighting symptoms instead of fixing the core problem. What is the core problem here? We have hundreds of security vulnerabilities. We have bad policies and bad processes. That's the core problem here. And the individual high security finding the server that is not patched is only a symptom of that. So you can run after all these symptoms, try to fix them, but you're not adding anything because 2 weeks afterwards, you'll have new security vulnerabilities. The processes are completely wrong, and Nessus is contributing to the problem. Nessus is not providing you with the solution. And I'm not saying there is no job for Nessus in this game. I think if you have a perfect setup and everything is fine, then Nessus can come in and reassure you, yes, good job, tap on the shoulder. Nicely done. The problem is, of course, if Nessus has to disable the proxy server, then it's no good. So too many false positive and too much friction working through false positive. Not good. Next idea or example. This is a random headline I found on the internet, and it says that overfill 14 million cyber attacks are blocked daily, says a report. If you read the small print, actually it says 14 million attacks on 1,200 websites amongst 12 billion requests on a single day by a super strong sensors by some random security company. These are not attacks, ladies and gentlemen. These are bullets. What is an attack and what is a bullet? We have an industry that is not quite sure what an attack actually means, but that is an individual HTTP request here. So 40 million requests were intercepted. But that's not an attack. It's like going to war and counting bullets. That's no point. That is irrelevant information. They make a headline out of this because they profit from inflating the numbers. I mean, they place an incentive when you get action, get to work now, buy our stuff because, wow, 40 million attacks daily detected by us. We come to you and detect all these attacks hitting you. But it's actually quite irrelevant. I would be interested how many of these requests were actually dedicated attacks by persistent threat attacking these 1,200 websites. But that information is not in the article, and I'm pretty sure the product is not able to give me that information. Who has an interest in inflate number? Who is typically inflating numbers? Spam detection software. Very high number. The more spam you detect, the better. Bigger licenses, you can say. There are license models around. For every spam message detected, you get more. So you have an interest to get more spam somehow to make money. Firewall administrators tend to block a lot of IP packages, raising the number of attacks. It's only an IP package. And then web application firewall operators, people like me somehow, we have a tendency to inflate the numbers because every request that we're blocking is an attack, when it's perhaps only a bullet. Good, even bigger numbers. Here is a report I found online which came out in February, I believe. Yes, the end of February. A site called Textury, and they would talk about 300,000 new pieces of malware are created daily. Yeah, this is what happens when you create them in an automatic manner. I mean, you run and it generates malware for you. That doesn't mean that it's going to be deployed. This is the business these criminals are doing. So let's take a step back and remember that security resources are always limited. Every dollar and every hour spent on nonsense is a dollar without a return on investment. It's friction. It's heating up the climate, if you want. So if you buy a license for some commercial software based on a shitty report with inflated numbers, you're actively burning dollars in a dumpster fire. Don't fall for such a trap. And shame on you if you create such reports with inflated numbers consciously or in a careless way because you think every IP package blocked is actually an attack. So we have an incentive to gain more budget through inflated numbers. And the result is company resources misassigned. They flow to the highest number. Or management stops trusting the reports. You tell me which one is worse of the two options. So we're getting close to dashboards now. These inflated numbers. Dashboards have a tendency to show you inflated numbers as well. In fact, I've been suffering from examining too many dashboards. Why is that? I'm working on a dashboard myself. I've been working on a dashboard all through 2022. And why is that? Because I've yet to see a decent dashboard. I've been in this industry like 20 years or so, doing a lot of web application firewall, web server security engineering, and I've never seen a good dashboard. Here are two examples. The top right is the infamous Norse dashboard. That came out like 2016 or so. It is animated. So what you see here is IP addresses sending IP packages across the globe, and then they hit data centers and they explode, and it's really cool. It's nice ice candy. And then lots of lists, and it's all animated, and it grabs your attention. And you get the feeling this is actionable for you. This is something where you have to do something about this, but that's not the case. It's only show. It's only eye candy. Consequently, Norse died a year or two afterwards. Nice video, but that's not security, what you're getting here. The lower left corner is from the Kibana documentation. This is an example dashboard that Kibana is proposing to you. You should implement. This is how you could set up Kibana to look nicely. It doesn't have a lot of data. I mean, it's documentation, but you get the idea already. I mean, the numbers are too small, but there seem to be spark lines on top. Then we have bars on the left, the two very monolithic blocks. That's actually bar charts. And on top right and the lower right corner, we have two donuts or modern variants of pie charts. So the green areas on the left, I mean, what is the information here? I mean, it's no information. It's just a block of color. It doesn't tell us anything. But do the pie charts mean? I'm explaining to you the center the lower one here, the very colorful donut. It maps colors to numbers that don't tell me anything. You cannot read the numbers, but khaki color means 200 002 147, and then the blue is 200 002 476. Where is the information value in this? And this is in the documentation. This is what Kibana is proposing for you to do. Now, what is the idea behind a dashboard? Or why do you want to have a dashboard? I mean, it's nice. You can show it to management. You can show it to your friends and look at all the nice numbers and what our servers are doing and all the attacks that we're getting. Look at all these bullets flying in our direction. The promise of the dashboard is actionability. Tells you, hey, this is the information where you get to work and then you improve security. And A, I don't understand what this is telling me, and B, there is nothing I can do based on these color blocks or on the pie charts. I think pie charts are a really bad way usually of displaying information. I'm in a hate relationship with pie charts. I give you a next example. Let's dive into this. What is the promise? No, I have to repeat this. The point is that dashboards tend to give you not actionable information, but ready information. Actionable information would be something you need to do something. We have an imminent problem. Focus on this problem and you improve security. But that is most of the time not what the dashboard is playing you. Certainly not these dashboards here. What they're instead doing is displaying you ready information. Information they have at their fingertips that they can easily display to you to distract you, actually. The result is distraction. The incentive is they do you a nice dashboard, and the result is you're distracted. While you're looking at the dashboard, the attackers continue to attack you, and you're not even seeing it because of the wrong information. Something that people in web application firewall dashboards typically show is the total number of attacks, or the total number of bullets, if you want, hitting the application. That is completely irrelevant. Who cares? If you have a roof on your house, do you care how many raindrops it stopped? Are you interested in the number of raindrops stopped per roof tile? Do you want to see the metrics of the average raindrop count stopped per hour grouped by month? Who cares about this bullshit? It's completely irrelevant. Next one. This is an element of a typical web application firewall dashboard. It's the rule alert. So web application firewall work with rules, and they identified malicious requests, and then they block them, and then they do dashboards where they tell you, hey, this is important. This is what I did. This is where you put your attention. I mean, obviously, the top line here must be the most important information. And the top line says we have 1259 alerts on the rule host header is a numeric IP address. That is where they focus your head off. This is where dashboard proposes, incentivizes you to put your brain share. Look at this. This is important. Now, as it happens, who triggers that rule? It's misconfigured load balancers using the host header, the HTTP host header. They use it with an IP address when the RFC actually says it has to be a fully qualified domain name. It's sloppiness. It's misconfiguration. If you don't like this, configure the load balancer correctly. And if you don't, nothing bad happens. Uptime agents, same behavior, and then people scanning the internet trigger this rule. Yes, it's an alert, but who cares? That's not the danger. Somebody doing a cheap scan of the internet is no threat to you. If that person is a threat to you, then you have far bigger problems. The threat to you are those people who know how to set a host header correctly so they don't trigger this rule. So what this dashboard element shows us has a lot to do with survivor bias. Wrong incentives. You probably know this graphic. It's quite famous in the IT security industry. It's a graphic from the Second World War. This is a bomber, an Allied bomber. And for every bomber returning from a bombing mission in Germany, they will count the bullets and put them on the graph. So every red dot is a bullet in a bomber who survived a bombing mission over Germany, perhaps. If you jump to conclusions quickly, you would go, let's improve the armor on the bomber where we have the red dots. Isn't that natural? I mean, this is where they have been hit. We need to improve the bomber in these regions. And that's completely wrong. The point is, the bombers are already surviving hits in that area. The problem is the bomber hit by bullets that didn't return. And chances are, these are the bullets that hit the white areas. Those bombers didn't return. So what you need to do is improve the armor in the area where there are no red dots here. So it's the other way around. By focusing on the wrong information, you're following the wrong incentives. And that's exactly the problem with dashboards. It's survivorship bias. It tells you what happened already, the stuff that you blocked. It's the rain that has been stopped by the roof. The one thing I'm interested in my roof is, where are the leaks? I'm not interested in the rain that it stops. I'm interested in the rain that it didn't stop, that is ruining my house. That is the problem. So there are two pieces of information that are really interesting here. A, only requests that target existing service endpoints are relevant. People scanning the internet are scanning everybody. They're not scanning your endpoints. What is going to happen with these requests, they're getting a 404 most of the time. They're not hitting your application anyway, so why do you care? It's completely irrelevant. They're triggering these rules on the dashboard, but they wouldn't mean no harm to you. They're no problem. And B, the real danger are requests by IP addresses that have triggered alerts, but they continue to improve their attack, and then they bypass the rule set. On subsequent requests, they're no longer being blocked, and then they start to hit relevant endpoints. These are the dangerous requests. This would be actionable. Hey, look, this is somebody who ran into the firewall. We blocked him on the first 2, 4, 6 attempts, but then he got his act together and suddenly he hit the backend application. Now we need to do something about it. That is a real attacker. That is a persistent attacker. And I failed to see a dashboard ever to give me this information. And that would be actionable and really important. So the incentives are, look at the seemingly interesting numbers and maybe shiver in front of all the attacks on your screen. And the result is, while you look at irrelevant track record, the attackers bypass the web application firewall, leaving no trace. Good. Let's talk about bug bounty hunter. I think it's time to talk about bug bounty hunters. Do we have bug bounty hunters in the room? Don't be shy. We don't have bug bounty. Oh, there is one at the very end. Hello, Ale. Okay, let's laugh a bit about Ale. Are pen testers in the room? Yeah, there are far more pen testers. That's one of the problems. Far more pen testers than bug bounty hunters. We get to you pen testers immediately after the bug bounty hunters. That a deal? Good. So bug bounty hunters have been around for a couple of years. Please appreciate the hoodie photo found as one of the photos have not been used in any sales presentations before. I even paid money for that photo. I like it so much. It's so cool. So bug bounty has been around for a couple of years, at least in Switzerland, and we see tendencies now in the market. There was a promise around bug bounty hunting. I'm very much in favor of bug bounty hunting as well. I promoted that a lot. And now we're seeing, maybe we don't really get what we expected from this new technique. Maybe something else is happening. Maybe it's still a net positive, but there are definitely incentives at play here that are not in favor of security. And you see where I'm taking this already. The question is, are bug bounty hunters interested in security? We say probably yes. Yeah, that's why they work in security. And that's certainly one of the incentives, how they start to bug bounty hunt in the first place. And the question more to the point, are bug bounty hunters interested in securities of the companies that they're probing, of the programs that they're working for? Now, ideally, yes. However, in reality, I think the bounties are spoiling bug bounty hunters real quickly. It's like nice people entering an investment bank. Money spoils them really quickly. I think after a couple of months or years, they're more interested in personal fame. That's how red teamers work anyway. They want to be the greatest hackers in the world. I think that's natural for a red teamer. So they're interested in personal fame. Personal fame is directly tied to monetary incentives in bug bounty hunters. Higher bounties means you're cooler than the other guy. So it's 5 digits bounties that they're after. And how do you get 5 digits bounties? It's about automation of the bug discovery and optimizing. Ultimately, it's specialization. The bug bounty hunter has a strong incentive to specialize in certain area. as I came to see, I have a limited vision on this, I think it's cross-site scripting. A lot of bug bounty hunters are specializing in cross-site scripting because it's relatively easy to automate and it promises big payouts. It's a growing industry, namely in Switzerland. More and more programs pop up. It's like mushrooms in autumn, more and more programs, but relatively few bug bounty hunters around. It seems only Alain in the room is a bug bounty hunter. So there is a high demand for bug bounty hunters by so many programs and relatively little bug bounty hunters. So as a bug bounty program, you struggle to get them onto your program, and then these guys are specializing in a niche or in a certain area. And that means you get spotty coverage. And the promise of the bug bounty was you had thousands of hackers probing your servers and they'll have no stone unturned and ultimately they will discover every weakness. But what you're getting now is 5 professionals hitting you with all cross-site scripting around and the rest of your application is probably not covered properly. Let's turn to penetration testers. As I said, I've been in this industry for quite a long time. And I've never seen, correct me if I'm wrong, open for feedback, but I've never seen a penetration tester kill a project. No. They always write nice reports. They always have critical vulnerability findings. But whenever I read these reports, I mean, I like these people. I'm really a fan of penetration test reports because it's so interesting. I learned so much. I can improve my setup and so on. But I always get the feeling it's very well balanced. The executive summary very often goes, "You've done good work so far. However, we realize that there are still a couple of weaknesses in your application. However, if you continue the good work, then you can make this work. I mean, you can do this. It's challenging, but you can do this. And then we'll come back and do a retest of your application." So I think the the penetration tester has a very strong incentive in a follow-up contract. And the result is that the penetration tester will not turn every stone. The penetration test is scoped anyway, so there is a contract what they're supposed to look at. But it's very holistic. It will be too expensive anyway. And the result, based on this incentive for the next contract to be nice, so it's a nice executive management summary, is a nice contract and a nice report that guarantees a follow-up contract. Penetration testers tend to call this a partnership, a long-term partnership. But I think a long-term partnership is a nice word for follow-up contract. Let's continue to do business because I tap your shoulder and you give me money for it. That doesn't mean it's not security, but it means you'll get a limited view of the security of your online service. The penetration tester does not have an interest to rip you apart by telling you about things you've never heard of and they're completely undermining the security of your setup. You better stop working today and drop that project. It's not how this works. The result is, again, spotty coverage in the reports. So no matter what you seem to be doing, neither penetration tester nor bug bounty hunters give you a comprehensive coverage of your online service and their security. In fact, nobody can give you a substantial assessment of the services or the security of your services. The incentives are simply playing against you and your requirements, and only time will tell whether you're secure or not. Good. Let's look at the Anthem breach. Probably don't remember that. It was in 2015. That was the biggest eHealth patient data breach. The incentives here in play are business. They build bigger and larger baskets, and then they put all the eggs in the same. The incentive being centralize, digitalize, consolidate to get better revenue, higher margins. However, the result is, of course, a cluster risk. And when the database is exploited, you lose all the eggs or all the patient data, obviously. If you look through the newspaper article, this one is from Wall Street Journal, the affected products, let me quote them, are called Anthem Blue Cross, Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Georgia, Empire Blue Cross and Blue Shield, AmeriGroup, CareMore, Unicare. These are all different brands on the markets, and they all came back to the same database that was hacked. The incentives of business work contrary to security very directly here. Now, a funny rumor is that Anthem actually had a cyber insurance with a coverage of 100 million, and they used all that money for the notification process. So, really bad for Anthem. Good. Crisis communication. The incentives are twofold. This example came up on Monday. Swiss pen testing company Pentagrid revealed that Wiseka credit card company of Switzerland had a weakness on the server. You could look up credit card statements of companies without being the owner of this data. This is Heidi News talking about it. It was popularized by the Republik, Swiss-German online magazine on Monday. And for the company Wiseka, they did not communicate this. Certainly not with the end users. However, they also informed the banks that are connected to this user really, really late. In crisis communication, namely in IT security, I think there are two contradicting incentives at play. One is be proactive, be transparent about your problems, talk about it, put everything on the table so people can make up their mind, and don't downplay anything. However, the second incentive would be is a completely different strategy. Be secretive, be reactive, don't talk about it, and don't admit anything that they cannot prove to you. The promise of the second scenario is nobody will find out and no problem. Unless, of course, newspapers start to talk about it, and then everybody will tell you, hey, you should have been transparent from the beginning. However, I see in Switzerland the tendency to go with the second option so far, and they knew media will get this. Pentagrid announced we're going to publish this, and they had to expect me to jump on this. They still choose not our problem, no problem at all. And by the way, no customer data was ever revealed outside of a single funny user in the canton of Schwyz, and nobody knows why that record has been leaked. Good. Ransomware, closely related to that. Ransomware is all the rage. This here is the first cryptolocker from 1989. It's the 8th DOS Trojan. Very interesting. You had to send a check to Panama to get the decryption key. That business model didn't work so nicely. In the meantime, they've replaced Panama with Bitcoins. And that seems to work a lot nicer. I think ransomware is interesting from various perspectives, but one thing that I think is very interesting is the question, do you pay or you're not paying? Paying means the pain goes away immediately, downtime is over, you can continue with your work. Unfortunately, the result is the criminals get money in their hands and they're getting stronger over time. I'm seeing them getting more and more leverage. Ultimately, I think it will be no question whether you pay or not. I think the longer this goes, criminal will force you to pay, and you cannot afford to not pay in the end over legal threats or going out of business immediately. This question whether to pay or not becomes even more interesting if you look at cyber insurance. There is relatively little news about this, but I found this Reuters article where it says insurers say some attackers may even check whether potential victims have policies that would then make more likely to pay out. So if you manage to get a cyber insurance policy covering ransomware, that means the moment ransomware hits you, the cyber insurance takes over. Then from a criminal perspective, that is really attractive, because they get to talk to the professionals. They get to talk to people to know how to transfer bitcoins, the cyber insurance company. And they also don't have to do presentations where they present their business model and the service offerings to the victim. So from attacker perspective, it's very interesting to attack somebody who knows what the shot is, somebody with a cyber insurance. And from the perspective of the victim, the thing gets more complicated. That means the cyber insurance promises coverage for your loss, for your damage, but somehow there seems to be incentives around that means you're probably more likely to be attacked by having the cyber insurance. Certainly if you announce it, or there have been cyber insurances that have been hacked, so the customer database was stolen and there were data where they had where subsequent attacks resulted from the loss of the customer database. Good. We started 10 minutes late. Still have time. I'm coming to my last example now. It also happens to be the biggest one. Good. This is coming back to web application firewalls. This is like the only topic I really know anything about it. The rest here was all somehow things that sprang to my mind. But web application firewall, I've been working this for many, many years. And what is a web application firewall for repetition? It is something you place in front of your bank, of your online shop that does a first line of defense. It inspects the HTTP traffic, and if it encounters something suspicious, malicious traffic, it blocks it and stops the attack from hitting the backend application. It's like the first line of defense, an additional layer of security in front of your application. If done right, that contributes to security. If done wrong, it's a lot of pain without a return on investment. My business case is making sure you do have a return on investment. Good. There is a market of maybe 100 commercial offerings around globally, including content delivery networks and online cloud services. And there is a single open source offering, the OWASP Mod Security Core Rule Set, the project I happen to run in my spare time, co-run in my spare time. So as a commercial vendor, you have two options. 100 commercial vendors around. And they had to ask themselves the question, do we want to create a rule set on our own? Do we want to build something to detect all kinds of attacks and sell this to our customers? Or do we integrate the single open source offering into our solution? 2/3 of the market went with the second option. 1/3 of the market continues to develop their own rule set. Now, this is a matrix based on a blog post by Tuomo Makkonen. It's 2 or 3 years old, and he would look at commercial cloud web application firewall offerings. And then vertically, he would fire attacks against them. He would test their performance, their security performance, and then in the columns, you have the different commercial offering. First line, we're only looking at the first line, remote command execution. Remote command execution is very bad. If you happen to execute this and it works, then you have a root shell on the server. That is not nice. You want to defend against remote command execution. Mind you, having the WAF ignore a remote command execution doesn't mean you have a root shell immediately. It just means that the first line of defense failed. You still need a weakness in your application. So even if it's very red here, that doesn't mean you're immediately exploited. It just means that the promise of security was not delivered. You purchased a commercial solution and it didn't work. First column is AWS WAF. That's what you get very cheaply from AWS. It has a performance of 4% of the attacks in the remote command execution category are blocked. 96% of the attacks will bypass the AWS WAF, at least 2 years ago. Next column is AWS Fortinet rule set. So on AWS, you can have commercial additional rule set. The Fortinet one is 2.5 times better than the default one. Now we're up to 10%. So only 90% bypass the WAF. And then comes the third column. That's a stark contrast. Now we're over at the competition at Azure. And in the second line, you have in brackets the core rule set. That is my project. Azure is based on core rule set. They didn't develop their own rules. Primarily, they used the open source solution, and they get a green column. Now they're up to 71. They're 7 times stronger than Fortinet by using the open source solution. Next one is Barracuda. That's a company that's doing their own rules. Again, and then Alibaba, I don't know what they're doing exactly, but the fact that they have 2 green items means probably they're also based on CRS. Somebody told me they are, but I've never seen hard data on this. Then you have Google Cloud Armor, 73%, and in the final column, Cloudflare WAF, also based on CRS. Everything green, with the exception of the Alibaba Cloud, is known to be CRS and documented as being based on CRS. I don't know exactly what Cloudflare used to be doing 2 years ago in the remote command execution category. I think they disabled rules. And I also know for a fact they're improved in the meantime. So now that might be green in the meantime. But they disabled rules. So the open source offering gave them detection capability and they disabled it. And that leads us to the question, why would they disable it? And why would the commercial offerings or the commercial offerings being based on in-house rule set perform so much worse than the ones that use the open source offering? Why is the open source offering stronger than something commercial? Good. Let's look at a story that might explain this. Once upon a time, there was a boy. You probably know this story. The boy was a shepherd. Actually, he also had a ram in his shepherd in his herd for diversity reasons. And he would take the sheep to the forest. You know where I'm taking this. In the forest, there was a wolf. Very bad. So the boy screamed, raised the alarm, called the hunters, with the idea the hunters will come, hunt down the wolf, and make mincemeat out of the wolf. And it would be a big party in the village, and everything was nice, and the herd had no problem in the future. However, the problem is, it was a false alarm. The boy called the hunters, but there was no wolf. Same happened the next day. Same happened the day afterwards, false alarms, no wolf. The hunters gave up on the boy. And when the real wolf struck, I want to show you this one. This happens. Good. Coming back. Whoop. I think the story is very sad. It's also very bad. I think the way we're traditionally telling this story is we're telling it the wrong way. If you're a boy with sheep in a forest, it's really hard. There is a lot of missing information. The forest is dark, it's very dense, and the wolf is very cunning. So you don't know. You hear something. Maybe you see something. You don't know what is happening exactly, and you fear for your sheep. So you call the hunters, despite not knowing for a fact. You're not really sure. And you don't want to wait until the wolf has one sheep between his jaws. You want to be early. That's why you raise the alarm. I think the boy has very bad press in this story. But in fact, I think the boy is in a very bad position. And truth be told, this is my story. As an open source WAF developers, we're the boy. We're raising the alarm too early. We're provoking false positives. And this is the cost of doing business. Why are we doing this? Because the incentives are aligned for us to produce false positive. Honestly, if I produce a false positive, that's really bad. I'm sorry for the users. I'm sorry for the customers. Maybe somebody was checking out in an online shop and then a false positive happened. Business didn't happen. Company didn't sell something. They lost money consequently. And they complain to me and say, look, I'm really sorry for you, but you need to handle this and you have to work around this. Here is the documentation. Help yourself. This is what I'm telling you. Ultimately, I'm not affected. Or if I'm affected, it's very, very indirectly for my business. However, for a commercial company, situation looks very much different. For a commercial company, if somebody is not able to do business despite the product, they will get a call immediately. Hey, look, our CEO failed to log into our platform today and he was really pissed. And you guys need to get your act together because if you don't, we're stopping to pay you for the sheep. No, we stop to pay your license. Every false positive is a direct threat on the business model of a commercial WAF vendor. It's very, very bad to have a false positive for a WAF vendor. How about false negatives? For me, I'm coming to a security conference. We're going to do a coffee break afterwards. I want people to walk up to me and tap my shoulder and say, hey, I tried to get past your CRS rules at last week. Oh boy, it was tough. I was working as a penetration tester and they had disabled the WAF. It was so strong. Good job. That's what I'm into this game. This is what I want to hear. The last thing I want to hear, People walking up to me, ha, I run a penetration test and the WAF is bullshit. Ha, that's a joke what you're doing. All the hours you spend in your spare time was no match for my attack skills. That's the last thing I want to hear. I want to make a very, very strong WAF that is not allowing for any false negative. These are my incentives. That's how the open source WAF tries to be as strong as possible. And the commercial WAF tries to get out of the way of customers. They have a very strong incentive to avoid false positive and maybe exact false negative. We can, in the coffee break, explore the false negative situation in a commercial setup. I think it's even more pervert than this, but I don't want to dive into that in the presentation too long. So, time to wrap this up. Or time to come back to here. Now we have an explanation while the ones using commercial rules perform much weaker than the ones using open source rule set. And then in the case of Cloudflare, they looked at this and realized, hey, this is causing too much business problems. So let's take out a few rules of the strong open source offering. Incentives are at play here. And we need to look at the incentives to realize where do we get the strong product that delivers security, and where do we get something that is a nice checkbox security? Interesting enough, that is a graphic you don't see in the Gartner report or the Forrester WAF quadrant. The last thing they're looking at is WAF performance. Good, time to wrap this up. I see two levels of bad incentives. An overly relaxed attitude, ignorance, negligence, carelessness leads to bad incentives to users. For users. They trick them into weak decisions that ultimately undermine security. Think bad dashboards. Eating your brain shares, nonsense. Because the guy developing the dashboard didn't think from your eyes, from an operating perspective, what is actually important, what is actionable, what information is useful. It was just carelessness. On the second level, however, people are deliberately following or setting crazy incentives for immediate gain, financial benefit through bad incentives. They're consciously prioritizing financial benefit over security of users and their data. I see WAF vendors at play here and Elon Musk. Shame on him. So, what do we do about this? I think it's our job, it's your job, to raise the alarm when you see incentives that are not aligned with security in the projects that you're working on. You see people at the table who seem to have different incentives than the security goal that you actually have in mind. You need to step back and think about incentives when you make your business decisions or technical decisions. What are my incentives? What are the vendor's incentives? What is the consultant's incentives? What are the incentives of my boss, of the CISO, the security officer, everybody at the table? And if the incentives and security don't align, then you need to cry wolf early enough. Thank you very much. So we started a bit later than expected, but it's almost coffee break. Can we take one or two questions? Alain? One question.
Of course.
Of course. There is one question at the end, at the back.
Yeah, I've actually got a comment, not really a question, because you showed us the WAF comparison stuff.
Yes.
I personally don't really believe about WAFs, but yeah. So we are seeing this comparison between WAFs. The problem is, I look at the blog post from the guy who posted it, and there is no reproducibility in it.
Yes.
So if we are doing such a research, please, post your scripts that you are doing the research with and getting the results out of. Because otherwise, how can we really know whether this thing that we are seeing here is actually, good or not? Like, if you look at the examples they used in this research, they, for example, sent to some like an application hosted on AWS beyond one of the WAFs there, some payload that is, a command injection payload for like PHP applications. But what if your app is not really PHP? Then they marked it as false positive or whatever. Like you're not detecting this. And is that good? Probably not. And if you would like post or like publish your research, like how did you do this, then people can also, improve.
Yeah, point taken. I mean, Thomas Macon should have published the test scripts he used for this. He didn't. The reason I'm using this, because he's third party. I can reproduce this. I'm getting more or less the same results for these tests, but I'm obviously biased. Nobody would trust my numbers. So at least he's third party. No, I'm biased. I mean, I'm the wrong person to do that research. You should do the research and publish your results. I mean, nobody will trust my results anyway, because I have skin in the game. Obviously, I'm the wrong person. But somebody should do this properly. He just happens to be the only guy who did a comparison. And I think, Gartner and Forrester should do that research. I mean, that's what they're selling anyway. But the last thing is a comparison of the performance of the products that Gartner and Forrester are covering. They're looking at nice dashboards and stuff and machine learning, artificial intelligence, but ability to detect an SQL injection is no criteria for them. I think they should do that research. Yeah. Thanks. Other questions or remarks? Yeah, there is one. Thank you. I mean, if I'm not getting any bad feedback for this presentation, then I will be disappointed. And I wasn't aggressive enough.
I got this feeling after this presentation that we cannot trust commercial vendors somehow, because I'm working as a security engineer, and we constantly check for new vendors, starting from WAF to static code analysis, dynamic code analysis, and there are different vendors, and they try to sell you how great we are. But here we see that it's always the money is a huge incentive, and how or what would be the good way to differentiate, to really understand, are they really interested in giving us a good security product, but rather than just keeping us, on a 3-year deal and then after that and so forth.
Yeah, honestly, I think I have very strong negative opinions on that. As you've heard, I'm an open source enthusiast, and I always in favor of make up your mind yourself, get knowledge, and then you look at the project, evaluate them, but maybe not everybody can do that. And maybe it's not as negative as that. But I think what is definitely worthwhile is looking at incentives. Just take a step back and take a couple of minutes. Why are they doing this like that? Why is a spam detection software selling me a license on the number of spam detected? Why is a log platform selling a license based on the lines of logs that they're logging? So their incentive is obviously to log more. But is that security? I think that when you look at these deals and offerings, try to understand their incentives. And then you see, hey, look, no, they have the right thing in mind, and we know this company for a couple of years. It's a good partnership. Yes, we do follow up contracts, but we really benefit from this. Or do you see, hey, they just want to sell a license, shiny leaflet? And I'm probably not the best partner to talk about discussions because I have a fairly negative view on that. But ultimately, I'm only a security consultant myself, so I have my own incentives to pay my bills. Other questions? Is there a demand for coffee in the room? Oh yeah, please again.
Another comment. So regarding pen testing stuff and the incentive of cash and not giving you a negative feedback because we want to work with you or something like that. An interesting aspect of that is that when you have an adversarial pen test or an audit or something like that. So you as a company pay another company to audit not your software but another software.
Yeah.
And that's a really nice situation to be in, doing such an audit. But, that's not an option as an option.
Yeah, and I haven't been in that situation, but true, then suddenly the incentives shift. I think that's an interesting proposal. Good. So let's go for the coffee then. Thank you for your attention.